Hi everyone, I'm John Rennie, thanks for joining me, and welcome to the Boneyard. In today's film culture, it goes without saying that Russian filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky is counted among the greatest directors of cinema. His influence reaches out far afield to modern filmmakers such as Paul Schrader and Stephen Soderbergh, who remade his film Solaris in 2002. It has been said by many, including himself, that the cinema of Tarkovsky is the cinema of poetry, and that his works are filled with visual metaphors and poetic dialogue about the mysteries of the human condition and how it is our memories that make us human, and that these metaphors and poetic moments shadow the stories of Tarkovsky's works, which are often deceptively simple when we break them down into film form and narrative structure.
Я чувствую, что меня учат какой-то профессии, что в этом есть какой-то фокус технический в этой профессии, но что при помощи кино можно выражаться, как при помощи поэзии, музыки, литературы. У меня не было такого чувства. Это был поиск, так сказать, совершенно ощупью. Так сказать, я шел и пробовал, и искал, и находил для себя какие-то моменты соприкосновения с поэзией.
Tarkovsky was making movies in Russia at a time when the state had control over all aspects of the arts. And his previous, very personal work, which he had pitched to the studio to be made, was rejected for being too personal and most likely critical of the state. So he quickly pitched a film version of famed 1961 sci-fi novel Solaris by Polish writer Stanislaw Lem. The movie had already been made into a TV miniseries in late 1968 for Polish television and had done well with viewing figures, and for completists and fans of Lem's book, or Tarkovsky's films, this TV version remains very loyal to Lem's book and is well worth checking out. Shortly after he pitched the work, the film version was greenlit, although the State Film Board told Tarkovsky that any mention of the G word, meaning God, had to be removed from the movie. But as we are dealing with a filmmaker who dealt with metaphors and poetic cinema, this of course was no problem for the talented filmmaker.
Нет страха. Он умер от стыда, стыд. Вот чувство.
Tarkovsky was a film school student, having studied in the mid-1950s at the Moscow State Institute of Cinematography in the school's directing program, which was a hotbed of talented filmmakers, actors, and cinematographers that would all go on to make outstanding contributions to cinema, such as Kira Muratova, whose films also suffered from censorship in Russia at the time, and also director Andrei Konchalovsky, who directed the now legendary intelligent action thriller Runaway Train for Canon Films in 1985. So it is no wonder that Tarkovsky's first film was a beautifully realized stylistic work, as he had already had an academic career in the art of cinema and directing, where he had perfected his poetic style, and his first feature film, Ivan's Childhood, directed in 1962, won the Golden Lion Award at the Venice Film Festival. By 1972, Tarkovsky had directed 2 films, one of which had been successfully released on the global film market, and I'm sure it is for that reason that when he pitched a sci-fi work that had already proven lucrative, that the studio greenlit Solaris, as on paper it seemed like a sure thing, and because of its sci-fi premise, would not go against any of the restrictions placed on the film industry in the country at that time. Little did the film board know.
Предложению Сарториуса подвергнуть плазму океана жесткому рентгеновскому облучению. Я знаю, это запрещено. Но другого выхода нет. Быть может, это все сдвинет с мертвой точки.
Критизм нашего времени заключается в том, что мы находимся в огромном отрыве, так сказать, мы находимся в конфликте между своим духовным развитием и материальным, по к нынешнему положению нашей цивилизации, драматическому и, я бы сказал, почти трагическому, поскольку мы стоим на грани, так сказать, атомного уничтожения.
It has now been clearly documented in his own words that Tarkovsky was not a fan of the cold and inhuman nature the famed director Stanley Kubrick's 1968 sci-fi movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, as it was said that Tarkovsky had set out to make a very different film that was much more human in nature than Kubrick's work. Personally, I think 2001 is a very human work that is about the very nature of what makes us human, but that's a story for a completely different video. As much as I disagree with Tarkovsky about 2001, whatever influenced him to make Solaris in the way that he did is fine by me, because personally, I believe this film to be a sci-fi masterwork. Tarkovsky's vision of Lem's novel, which in simple terms is about mankind's first contact with an intelligence in the universe, is a heartbreaking tale of memories, mistakes, longing for human connection, and I think self-induced loneliness, but also a film about allowing oneself to be forgiving and finding catharsis through self-analysis.
Почему он это все-таки сделал? Наверное, чувствовал, что я не любил ее по-настоящему.
The story follows psychologist Chris Kelvin, who is sent to a space station orbiting the planet Solaris to report if the station should remain active or be shut down, as the scientists aboard the decades-old station have reported strange events before being cut off from communication. I've always found it interesting that Kelvin, whose namesake is actually a cinematography term, that is the measurement of color and the temperature of light, is a psychologist, and not a soldier or a cosmonaut. And the fact that he is sent to the station alone has always interested me and has brought up many questions amongst fans.
Эй, где вы все? Здесь гости, прием!
Many theories around the film take a stance that Kelvin was always on the planet's surface of Solaris, and that the opening of the film has inconsistencies and visual clues that suggest that we are looking at Kelvin surrounded by fragments of his own memories right from the first frame, and that we are never on Earth. For example, the strange white yellowish balloon that we see in the opening that hangs over the water seems to have no purpose. Is this just a fleeting memory of nostalgia from his youth? Or is it some kind of scientific instrument like a weather balloon that was always meant to be there? The only thing we can be sure of is that that balloon appears once again and is no longer still, but swirls and circles violently through the air as the camera pulls back to reveal Kelvin on the surface of Solaris in the last shots of the film. Many props reappear throughout the movie. There is constant use of the book Don Quixote, which Kelvin reads aloud at one point in the story, describing that Quixote thought he was the only one who could see his fantasies in the story, but of course he wasn't.
Он умер от безвыходности. Он думал, что все это происходит только с ним.
And this has a huge bearing on the narrative in Solaris, as the same can be said of Kelvin, who retreats away from his job and becomes more unstable, as he locks himself away from the others with the doppelganger of his dead wife Hari, and lives with the fantasy that they can share the same love they once had again, before she becomes too self-aware for this to carry on. This is also the same with the metal box that Kelvin carries in the opening of the film. This box reappears over and over in different places. He takes it with him to the space station, and it carries a film of his childhood and parents, which plays a huge part in his personal revelations towards the end of the film. And later we see it with new life growing from it in the form of a sapling. I think this is a metaphor for new revelations and new life growing from Kelvin's analysis of his own past. He literally carries his past with him. Keep an eye out for other props, as this is just a few examples and who knows what the rest could signify. Some have said that they were just used again and again to save cost on set, and this is a possibility, or as I think, they are signifiers of what is real and what is created by the intelligence of Solaris. Personally, I think that these early scenes are indeed Kelvin home on Earth, and that the rainstorm we see in the opening, which happens outside, gives us a visual clue, and in the end we see the same rainstorm again, but it occurs inside the house. And this is when Kelvin is living completely in his memories as the rainstorm, the house, and his relationship with his father have all become one amalgamation of his memories on the planet. Another one of the interesting things is that the intelligence begins to send these doppelgangers, visitors or guests as they are called, to the scientists after they try to X-ray the planet's surface with radiation. It would appear that the planet X-rays them back, and that is how it is able to project their deepest fears, regrets, and hidden feelings back at them.
Кто это?
Whatever they do to Solaris seems to come back at them tenfold, a mirror that is reflecting themselves back at them.
Ты себя знаешь?
Как каждый человек.
Kelvin's first visitor is his partner Harry, who committed suicide by injecting poison that he left in the fridge of their home when they'd had an argument and separated. He perhaps blames himself for her death, and he lives daily with that pain.
Я не Харри. А Харри умерла.
I believe that the intelligence, once X-raying Kelvin, is trying to communicate with him and understand him, the same way that we probe and test animals, by giving him his deepest desire to reconcile with his own past and seeing how he deals with it. Solaris is giving him his deepest desires and giving him the chance to see his wife again and bridge the relationship with his father in the end, as it is explained in the film that Kelvin always felt that he could never live up to his father's expectations of manhood.
Крис, иди сюда! И очень кстати. Он гуляет каждое утро не меньше часа. Я ему запретил возвращаться раньше. Он мне напоминает бухгалтера, готовящего годовой отчет.
These are all things we would all do if we could control time and our lives. We would most likely try to reconcile our mistakes and psychological traumas. And what is really interesting is that if we take a look at the life of the filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky, there is a lot of his own life that actually happens in the movie. For example, Tarkovsky's second wife, Larissa Kizilova, suffered from fits, and this is reflected in a lot of his work, especially in Solaris, when Harry thrashes back to life after committing suicide when she drinks liquid oxygen. I believe that Solaris brought her back to life with these suicidal tendencies because this is how Kelvin remembers her, not to be cruel or punish him. In his diaries that were published after his death, Tarkovsky also talks about his alienation from his parents. There was definitely love between them, but he said that he always felt distant from them and felt that they could not communicate even though his father and mother were both artists, poets, translators and writers themselves, and obviously had passed on, if not at the very least affected their child with their artistic tendencies and nature.
Когда мама умерла, я почувствовал себя очень одиноким. Я, может быть, впервые почувствовал, что она была самым близким человеком в моей жизни для меня. От того, что почувствовал себя одиноким, почувствовал, что потерял самого близкого себе человека. То есть эти слезы были эгоистичными.
I see the relationship in Solaris between Kelvin and his parents, his domineering father, and silent and perhaps distant mother, to be Tarkovsky exploring his own feelings about his connection to family.
Я очень одинок сейчас.
Зачем ты нас обижаешь? Чего ты ждал? Почему не звонил?
One other thing that is definitely worth mentioning is that Tarkovsky left his first wife and child and took a second lover. And a lot of the visitations to crew manifest as children. Tarkovsky's own daughter plays a small role, but specifically, this is referenced in Burton, who is the first cosmonaut to land on Solaris, whose visitor is that of a child that he abandoned some years before, and it is that regret that comes back to haunt him. I believe that Solaris is a movie about exploring our regrets and most importantly embracing them and learning to live with them instead of denying them, because they are the most important part of us, as most of the crew seem to ignore their visitations in the film. This is what separates Kelvin from the rest of them, as he embraces them, and in the end it is clear from Harry's final speech, as she berates the crew members, that they are not feeling creatures if they refuse to accept what is right there in front of them, and deal with their deepest fears, problems, and regrets.
Гостей, вы, кажется, так нас называете чем-то внешним, мешающим. А ведь это вы сами. Это ваша совесть.
I find it very poetic that Kelvin is a psychologist.
Мне кажется, я немного болен. Вы совершенно здоровы.
Because to me, it seems that the intelligence or the ocean of Solaris is actually psychoanalyzing the scientists by sending these visitors, and it discovers that each man is an island unto himself. And this is indeed what we see in the last images of the movie. Kelvin is on his own island, or indeed his own planet, dealing with and making peace with his deepest thoughts, feelings, regrets, and memories. I think Solaris is a mirror and can perhaps be described as the famous abyss. If you stare at it for too long, it will stare back into your soul. And I believe this is what Solaris does. From an alien perspective, it is trying to understand what makes us human, and it discovers that it is our faults, self-loathing, memories, and most importantly, our conscience that makes us who we are as individual beings.
А ведь это вы сами. Это ваша совесть.
Toward the end of the movie, Kelvin's brainwaves are projected at the planet, and this stops the hallucinations for the other scientists at the station. When I was younger, I thought this was to say that perhaps he was making the ultimate sacrifice to save the others.
Доверить все этому киселю. И так уже мне лез в душу.
But now that I'm older, I see it as his final acceptance of himself, and that Solaris now understands him the most, as he has shown a scientific and extremely emotional response to their probing.
Кельвин более последователен, чем он. В человеческих условиях он ведет себя по-человечески, а вы делаете вид.
It is then explained that islands have begun to appear on the surface of the planet, and I think these islands are physical manifestations of Kelvin's memories. He sleeps once more and dreams of his mother. Another of his regrets is that she left the family when he was young. Finally, he becomes completely one with the intelligence, and he becomes Solaris, or the mirror himself. I hate to say it, but similar in the way that Dave Bowman evolves when he enters the Stargate at the end of 2001, Kelvin has now evolved to a state of being where he is completely at an understanding of himself. This, for me, is one of the most cathartic endings in sci-fi history. A story of an alien intelligence showing us who we are and what we yearn for the most in our lives, peace with ourselves. What an extraordinary realization.
Уж не хочешь ты сказать, что он нас понял?
Ну уж, так сразу. Да зато у нас появилась надежда. А, Крис?
On a personal note, I'd like to say that Solaris was a huge part of my life. Not only because it is a perfect sci-fi film that uses scientific metaphors and alien worlds to tell a story that is based in human psychology, but it was also one of the first films that I ever saw in a foreign language. I was in my very early teens and I was beginning to broaden my film horizons, and it was Tarkovsky's Solaris and then Kurosawa's Seven Samurai that would be the first foreign language films I would ever see, and boy, what an awakening for a young film fan. Solaris seemed to me then like an alien film itself because it sounded and looked nothing like what I'd seen before. And the film blew my mind, and I realized for the first time that film can be a cultural bridge to let us know that we are all the same, and we all share the same fears, desires, hopes, and dreams, and that the filmmaker, as an artist, can show us their souls on screen, even in a genre world. It was Solaris that helped put me on the track that became my career and my life. So it is a very important film to me, and one that I will forever be exploring and looking at, just as Solaris, the mirror, looks back at me. It's an incredible feat of poetic genre filmmaking. Thanks for listening to my thoughts on Tarkovsky's Solaris. If you'd like to hear more from me about Tarkovsky and other filmmakers, please remember to like and subscribe. Let me know what you think about this sci-fi tale about the human condition in the comments below. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.